The day I realized Jacob had taken everything from me, he was smiling like he'd just closed the best deal of his life. We were standing in the small conference room of Harper and Lane at 5:12 p.m., the fluorescent lights buzzing, the city already dim through the blinds. Jacob slid a printed contract across the table and said, "Congratulations, Alex. Looks like the board wants me to lead the East Coast accounts." I stared at the paper, my signature, my client list, the months of work I'd done to land Meridian Logistics, and I felt my voice leave me for a second. "You signed this without telling me," I said. He didn't look surprised. He folded his hands and gave me the practiced, calm look he uses in front of clients. "You were on vacation. I handled the presentation. You'd have thanked me later." I remember the way the room smelled then. Coffee gone cold in styrofoam cups, the faint chemical of toner, and how absurd it felt that something so small on a piece of paper could mean my whole year. We started Harper and Lane 3 years earlier after work hours over beers. I handled client acquisition. Jacob handled operations. We split everything in the books until the books stopped matching reality. That summer, Meridian became the account that would change us. I took the lead on meetings, stayed late building proposals, and lost sleep rewriting decks. Jacob smiled from the side, told the clients he would support implementation, and the clients liked him because he never used industry jargon. When the promotion came, there was no meeting. There were emails I hadn't received and minutes I hadn't been invited to. There was a board memo with my name listed under contributions and his under leadership. There were versions of our history that fit him better than they fit me. After Jacob left the room, I sat alone with the contract and read every line as if a clause could explain how I'd been erased. The legal language meant nothing. The fact was simple. The board trusted his version of events and rewarded him. I didn't storm out. I closed the contract, put it back in the folder, and walked to my desk. I opened my laptop, logged into the shared drive, and started pulling files. Not because I wanted to sue or because I believed paperwork would fix the betrayal. I wanted to know exactly what had happened, and I wanted to know if any of it could be fixed without the board deciding for me first. The files were messy. Older proposals with both our names, email threads where he'd copied clients but omitted me, a calendar invite he'd canceled the week before the final board vote with the subject line, "Sync with board," that I'd never seen. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. Jacob had been rewriting the story of our company in plain sight. Around midnight, I found the first concrete thing. An email from Jacob to the board attaching a version of the Meridian proposal in which his name appeared as primary lead and mine was listed in a subordinate role. The timestamp showed it had been sent 2 hours after our joint meeting. I replayed that meeting in my head, the handshake, his quiet laugh, and realized he had edited the narrative as soon as he had a chance. I printed the email and put it in a manila envelope. I sat down at my kitchen table and stared at it like it was a map. I thought about calling people, clients, friends from other firms, but every phone call felt like a move on a chessboard with unknown players. I also thought about walking into Jacob's office the next morning and yelling until someone called security. Instead, I folded the envelope, put it in my jacket, and went to bed. Before I turned off the light, I opened my laptop one more time and wrote a single line in a draft email to Maya, an old account director who had left the industry and still owed me a favor. "I need to talk. It's about Jacob." I didn't hit send. I saved the draft and named the file Start. Then I closed the laptop and decided that whatever I was going to do next had to be exact. I couldn't afford anger or theatrics. I needed proof, patience, and a path that would leave me standing at the end. The contract in my desk said he had the title now. The rest was still mine to get back. The next morning I opened the laptop, found the draft titled Start, and hit send. Maya replied in 20 minutes with a single line, "Meet me at Carmen's at noon. Bring everything." Carmen's is a diner 3 blocks from Harper and Lane, No pretension, good coffee, and a corner booth that didn't invite eavesdropping. I arrived with the manila envelope and a folder of files, original proposals, meeting notes, printed email headers, and a copy of the shared drive timestamps I'd pulled the night before. I didn't tell her the whole story in the text. Sometimes you need a person's face to measure how far you can push. She showed up with the same clear-eyed look she always had. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, sliding into the booth. "Because I haven't," I said. I put the manila envelope on the table and pushed it toward her. "This is why." She flipped through the documents without surprise. Maya had spent a decade on the client side before she left. She knew timelines and authorship when she saw them. "You have him in the act," she said, pointing to the email where Jacob had attached the altered Meridian proposal. "Timestamp 2 hours after your meeting. That's ugly." "It's not just ugly." I watched her face as I explained the calendar invite he'd canceled, the drafts with my name scrubbed, and the threads where he'd copied clients but not me. He rewrote our work as soon as he had a shot. Maya folded the paper back and set it down. "There are 2 ways this goes. You can go to the board and make a scene, or you can go to Meridian and the other clients and show them the truth." "I don't want a scene," I said. The idea of public fighting inside the firm felt like handing the next move to whatever version of events the board already preferred. "I want to fix it where it matters, with the people we work for." She nodded. "Good. Clients care about results, and they also remember who was responsible when things go sideways. But you don't walk into Meridian with a manila envelope and expect them to switch overnight. You need credibility, and you need a contact who still trusts you." "I have people there," I said. "I ran the implementation plan. I know their operations manager, Evan. He's practical. He hates politics." Maya smiled like she'd been waiting for that. "Good. I still keep in touch with some client contacts. I'll call Evan. I'll say you need to walk him through the implementation plan because you worry about knowledge transfer. Keep it technical. No accusations. If he wants to meet, we schedule at Meridian. If he's open, you bring the documents." She dialed from her cell right there in the booth, kept her voice low, and within 10 minutes she had Evan on the line. I listened to a fragment, Maya's voice calm. Evan's voice clipped but polite, and then she hung up. "He can meet tomorrow afternoon. Meridian prefers to handle this quietly." Hearing a time made my chest tighten with relief. It was the first concrete thing that felt like more than reaction. "Tomorrow?" I asked. "Tomorrow." Maya folded her hands over the envelope. "Listen, Alex, this will be tense. If Evan calls it an HR issue, back off. You're there to clarify a technical plan and to demonstrate continuity. Make it about the work, not about Jacob's betrayal." I nodded. I thought about bringing the email with its timestamp and the drafts showing my authorship. I thought about how easy it would be to walk into that room and point fingers. Maya's warning kept me steady. "I'll keep it technical," I said. "No theatrics." She stood, gave me a quick, businesslike look and said, "Then prepare. Print everything Evan should see. Original decks, annotated notes with dates, client feedback that mentions you. I'll be in the lobby when you go in. If Evan asks tough questions, I'll add context." Back at my desk, I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. I annotated slides with short, factual notes, when a version was written, who was on each call, which client requested what change. I printed emails with headers visible, highlighted the timestamps, and put sticky notes on the pages where threads showed Jacob's edits. I rehearsed how I would explain the implementation plan in 5 minutes without sounding defensive. Before I left the office that evening, I made one more stop, Jacob's desk. He wasn't there. His mug, his blue Chicago Bulls mug, sat on the corner of the monitor. I could have rifled through drawers and found petty things to make me feel better. Instead, I pulled a clean legal pad from my own bag and wrote in plain block letters, "Tomorrow, Meridian, bring truth." I left the pad on his keyboard and walked out. Walking home, I felt a new kind of focus. I had a meeting, a witness in Maya and proof. I also knew exactly how Jacob might respond: denials, diversion, claims of credit. But I had chosen a path that made those defenses weaker, proof in the hands of the client. That night I organized the folder I'd bring and check the printer for a final time. The plan was simple, tight, and not impulsive. If it worked, it would begin to undo what Jacob had done. If it failed, at least I would have tried the one honest thing left to me, showing the people who mattered what had really happened. The next afternoon, I rode the subway with the folder on my lap, and my notes folded inside my jacket. Maya texted me one line as I stepped out of the station: "I'm in the lobby, calm." Meridian's lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and new carpet. Evan met me at the reception desk, mid-40s, short hair, the kind of practical face that doesn't waste energy on theatrics. He shook my hand without hesitation. "Thanks for coming, Alex," he said. "If this is about continuity, keep it tight. We have a status call at 5. We walked to a small conference room on the third floor. Maya sat in the corner, her laptop closed, watching. I set the folder between us and opened with a sentence I'd practiced until it felt mechanical. "I want to run through the implementation deliverables and show the versions where I led the work." I started from the beginning: dates, who was on each call, the specific items Meridian asked for in April, and how I revised the plan in May. I kept my explanations technical and short: resource estimates, deployment sequence, fallback procedures. When a client asked why I was emphasizing details, I replied, "Because if the handoff is sloppy, you'll have outages and finger pointing. The plan avoids that." Evan asked direct questions: how long the database migration would take, who would handle the nightly rollbacks, what the SLA looked like for the first month. I answered each one with the exact line items I'd written in the implementation schedule. He nodded, made notes, and when I passed him the printed emails with headers visible, he skimmed the timestamps without dramatics. Halfway through, he stopped and held up a printout. "This says Jacob emailed the board this version last week." He tapped the header. "Why does his name appear as lead here?" I slid the manila envelope across the table and handed him the email I'd found 2 hours after our joint meeting, the altered Meridian proposal with Jacob listed as primary. I kept my voice flat. "That's the one he sent after our meeting. The drafts before that have my authorship and timestamps that show edit history. He consolidated and sent a version that assigns leadership to him." Evan looked from the printed chain to my notes and then back at me. "Are you saying he rewrote it after the meeting?" "Yes," I said it plainly. I didn't add speculation about motives. Facts were easier to handle. "I can show you the version history and the client feedback that references the changes I made." He opened his laptop, brought up his inbox, and read a few lines. "Meridian wants stability, not politics," he said. "If you can prove you're the one who built the sequence and can run the rollout, that matters." We went through the technical sections again, this time with Evan asking for clarifications that were granular: script names, who on our team would have SSH access, what logs we would monitor. I answered each. Maya added context at 2 points, quietly correcting a date where an internal calendar had been off. Evan listened like he was assembling a picture. Halfway through the last section, my phone buzzed. Maya glanced at the screen and then at me. "It's Jacob," she said. "He's calling reception asking if he can join." Evan didn't look surprised. He closed his laptop and said, "If he's here, he can sit in. I'll hear both of you, but no theatrics." Jacob walked into the room 10 minutes later with a confident, too relaxed stride. He smiled at Evan like they were old friends and then looked at me with a polite, almost bored expression. "Evan, good to see you. I thought we agreed to align on the rollout." I let him say the brief greeting and then kept talking. I handed Evan the timeline showing who authored each draft. Jacob reached for a page, then stopped. He looked at me and said, "Alex, there's a misunderstanding. I've been handling the client-facing side while you focused internal. It made sense for me to consolidate." Evan held up the manila envelope and said, Why would you consolidate the document and change the lead after your joint meeting? He kept his voice steady. Jacob's smile tightened. I organized the materials to make the board comfortable. We all want a clear contact point. I didn't accuse him of treachery. I showed the version history on my laptop, timestamps, tracked edits, the sequence that proved authorship. Evan watched the cursor move and read the edit comments that bore my initials. Jacob leaned in, tried to explain the same edits as his, but the history was explicit. Evan closed the laptop and looked at both of us. I need Meridian's implementation to work. I don't care who has the title on a memo. I care who will take responsibility if something breaks. He paused, then said, Alex, you walk me through the call on Friday. I want you to own the technical runbook for the first month. Jacob, you can stay on communication with the board, but Meridian will take technical direction from Alex. Jacob's face changed from surprise to anger in a fraction of a second. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then looked at Evan and shut it. That's short-sighted, he said quietly. We agreed we'd manage this together. Evan didn't engage. He turned to me and said, send me the cleaned, dated version of the plan tonight. I'll share it with my director and we'll finalize the contact list. Don't include anything that isn't production ready. The meeting ended with a handshake and a plan. Evan's decision wasn't a public vindication, and it didn't restore my title, but it put the implementation where it belonged, with the person who had actually built it. As we left the conference room, Jacob stayed behind by the window, staring at the skyline. He said to me without looking, "You've made this personal." I said I made it accurate. Maya caught up with me in the lobby. "Well played," she said. "You kept it technical and they listened." I felt the relief as practical and sharp as a wound being stitched. It would take work to translate this into regained standing, but Meridian's trust gave me leverage. We had a short, concrete victory. That night I sent Evan the clean plan, dated and signed, and watched the email deliver confirmation. The next steps were clear. One technical call on Friday, a pilot the following week. It was enough to move forward, and for the first time since the contract, I felt like I had a path that might actually restore what Jacob had taken. Friday's call with Meridian was set for 3 p.m., and by noon I'd already checked the runbook 3 times. Every number, every fallback procedure, every contact detail. I rehearsed them as if forgetting one line would undo everything. When the call began, Evan introduced me as the lead on implementation. Jacob was also on the line, his voice calm, almost patronizing. He started by framing the project as a joint effort, but Evan cut in quickly. "Alex will walk us through the technical sequence. Let's focus there." I shared my screen and pulled up the rollout plan. Step by step, I explained database migration, downtime windows, log monitoring. Meridian's director asked sharp questions: budget implications, staffing hours, what would happen if the rollback failed. I answered each without hesitation, citing the sections of the plan that addressed those risks. Jacob interrupted twice, trying to shift the credit. "That part came from my discussions with the board," he said once. Evan didn't acknowledge it. The director kept her questions aimed at me. By the end of the call, she said, "This looks solid. We'll proceed with this sequence starting Monday. Alex, you'll be our main contact." It was the first time in weeks I felt my work acknowledged out loud. Jacob stayed silent for a long moment before saying, "We'll keep communication streamlined." His voice was tight. After the call, Maya texted me, "They trust you now. Use it." I didn't leave the office. Instead, I opened the shared drive and started cleaning the folder structures. I organized versions, labeled ownership clearly, and logged timestamps in a separate file only I controlled. If Jacob wanted to rewrite history again, he'd have to do it against records that were now impossible to deny. That evening, Jacob came to my desk. He leaned on the divider like nothing was wrong. "So this is how it's going to be. You going behind my back to the client." I looked at him steady. I showed them the facts. "You chose to erase me from the work. I didn't erase you, I just corrected the record." His smile was thin, calculated. "You think Meridian is the only account. The board listens to me. You've got a small win, but I'm still the one with the title." He walked off before I could reply. I sat there, letting his words settle. He wasn't wrong. One client's trust didn't fix the board's decision or the damage already done. But he had revealed something. He thought the title itself made him untouchable. That assumption could be used against him. The next week, during the first rollout phase, I kept communication strictly professional. Every success was documented, every checkpoint noted. When Meridian's migration went live without a single outage, Evan sent an email to the entire board. Thanks to Alex's detailed plan, the transition was seamless. This is the standard we expect going forward. I saw Jacob's name in the CC line. No reply came from him. By Friday, 2 more clients had asked me, not him, for clarification on technical issues. The board started copying me on communications again. Slowly, the center of gravity was shifting. But I also knew Jacob. He wouldn't sit back quietly. If he couldn't erase my contributions on paper, he'd find another way. The only question was when and how. That night over late coffee at my apartment, Maya said, "You need to be ready. He'll try to frame you as unstable or difficult. That's the next move." I nodded. Then I'll give him enough rope to tie his own hands. The plan forming in my mind was clear. I wouldn't fight him in the boardroom or through arguments. I'd make him expose himself, document his shortcuts, his arrogance, his lies, and let the people who mattered see it unfold in real time. For the first time, revenge didn't feel like an abstract idea. It felt like a sequence of steps, just like the rollout plan, deliberate, timed, inevitable. And Jacob had no idea the clock had already started. The week after the successful rollout, I tightened 2 things at once: the public record and who heard about that record. I kept sending succinct status emails to clients and copied the board, but I also started forwarding key threads directly to people who had real influence. Evan at Meridian, Maya's old contacts at 2 other firms, and Claire, the senior partner who still chaired the subcommittee that handled major accounts. My messages were short, factual, and time-stamped. I never editorialized. I let the threads and the timestamps do the talking. Jacob made his first move the way predictable people do, small and smug. He announced a new internal template that, he said, would streamline client handoffs. He sent the email to the team with a note that he'd created the template to make sure the board sees one version of the truth. I replied, all with a technical suggestion, 1 line about including authorship and edit history in the metadata, so the template would preserve provenance. 5 people liked the change in the thread. Jacob didn't reply to that note. 3 days later, one of his shortcuts showed up in production. He'd approved a compressed deployment window for a non-critical client because it made his quarter look cleaner. The deployment didn't break anything catastrophic, but it did trigger a series of small failures: delayed batch jobs, an overnight alert missed by an on-call engineer who'd been scheduled differently because the compressed window overlapped with handoffs. The client called. They were annoyed, not furious, but annoyed enough to ask for a post-mortem and accountability. Jacob's instinct was to spin. He drafted a command line note that framed the issue as unexpected third-party behavior and forwarded it to Claire with a short line about how he'd kept the board informed. I saw the draft because of the practice I'd started. Whenever Jacob circulated anything involving implementation, I copied myself and saved the version. I printed his draft and the relevant logs side by side, then emailed Claire with the logs and the exact schedule changes that created the overlap. I wrote simply, "These are the exact edits that led to the missed job window. Happy to walk through them with you." Claire replied within an hour and asked for a meeting. She didn't call it a disciplinary thing, she called it clarification. In her office, she pointed to the printed timeline and said, "You've been clear and methodical. This looks like a pattern of optimizing for optics over operations. I kept my answers short. I showed how the template he rolled out omitted authorship, how his compressed windows had been requested without consulting the on-call rota, and how the client's own logs matched the timing I'd highlighted. "What do you want, Alex?" she asked after I finished. "To remove single points of failure," I said. "Make ownership explicit in every client document and require a sign-off from whoever will handle the handover. Also, make postmortems factual and visible to clients, no spin." She nodded, not because she liked me, but because the facts aligned with her responsibility to protect the firm's reputation. Claire did something painfully efficient. She implemented procedural changes that exposed behavior instead of arguing about it in private. She required that all client-facing documents include a visible authorship header, and that any compressed deployment windows had written confirmation from operations. She told me, privately, "If you keep documenting, you'll force clarity." I kept documenting. When the next client asked why their weekly status notes no longer matched the board minutes, I forwarded the two versions to Claire with side-by-side highlights. When a junior PM came to me, worried that Jacob was taking credit for work she'd done, I helped her compile the metadata showing her authorship. One by one, people who had been silenced by habit started responding with facts. Jacob didn't respond with clarity, he responded with escalation. He began to undermine me in staff meetings, cutting me off and questioning my approach as too slow. He tried to rally a few colleagues by promising higher bonuses if we pushed more business through the board-friendly templates. That move backfired. The junior PMs he promised bonuses to answered his emails with the exact document histories I'd shown them. And HR started to log complaints about inconsistent incentive conversations. The tipping point happened 6 weeks after the Meridian call. A prospective client asked for references and copies of prior deployment notes. Jacob compiled a glossy one-page summary. I forwarded the full runbooks and the edit histories with a short note. "If you want the operational fidelity behind our summary, here it is." The prospective client replied that they preferred the full runbook, not the summary, and asked who would be responsible for day-to-day operations. They named me in the reply. When that email reached Claire, she called a meeting with Jacob and the two other senior partners. It was the first time I saw Jacob truly unprepared. He tried to argue that optics mattered, that investors liked a clean face. Claire interrupted and said, "Optics don't pay the bills when a client's systems are down. We need operators who know their stuff and who document their work." She turned to Jacob and said, "You handed off the technical responsibility to Alex with no formal transition. That's on you." They didn't fire him. That wouldn't have been realistic. He still had supporters and a roster of small wins he could point to. Instead, they gave him a stark choice. Either accept a new role focused exclusively on investor relations and external communications, or keep his leadership title but relinquish operational control of all major accounts. Jacob took the communications role. He told people later that he'd chosen to focus on strategic growth. In private, several colleagues said he'd been relieved of operational duties. The revenge I'd imagined as a dramatic unmasking had been nothing like that. It was slow, bureaucratic, and tedious. It was emails and timelines and quiet meetings. It was demonstrating competence until the people with authority had to decide between loyalty to a polished story and loyalty to outcomes. In the end, they chose outcomes. 2 months later, Meridian renewed a 2-year contract and asked that I remain their technical lead. Claire recommended me for a partner track that emphasized client operations and retention. I didn't celebrate wildly. I updated the shared drive metadata, printed a clean copy of the Meridian renewal, and replied to the partner committee with a short plan for scaling our operations team. Jacob sent a polite congratulatory note. I replied, "Thanks. Let's keep the documents clear." A few weeks after that, Jacob left the firm to take a communications job at a startup. Not because he'd been publicly shamed, but because the firm no longer needed him in the way it had before. I'd reclaimed what I cared about: credibility, clients, and work that matched my competence. I didn't get my old title back immediately. Titles are slow, reputations move faster. When I look back, the revenge wasn't about retribution. It was about forcing truth to be operationally useful. I could have shouted or punched a wall. Instead, I documented, I rallied clients quietly, and I let the consequences of his choices follow him. That left me with something better than a win, a structure where contributions were visible and hard to steal. And because the work mattered to people who paid for it, the firm adjusted. That, in the end, was enough.